Hello everyone, I'm Sejal. I'll be talking about my work PulmoListener, which is an end-to-end system that enables continuous acoustic monitoring of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease in the wild. So now we have had some background on COPD and how it's a chronic deadly disease and I'll just give a quick recap of what that is. It obstructs airflow to the lungs basically and makes it hard for patients to breathe properly and carry out their everyday functions. But it's also the third leading cause of mortality, amounting to a total of 14% of annual deaths, and a staggering 212 million people who live and deal with this disease on a daily basis. So, as we've talked about it earlier, the best solution we can offer a patient is to help them manage their disease better. And that's what we attempt to do in this work. We leverage technology to assist disease management and make COPD a little less breathtaking. So, we hope to achieve this through continuous lung assessment so as to detect the worsening of the lung condition as early as possible. This is super useful for enabling timely interventions. And a lot of prior work actually has looked at acoustic features as an indicator and as a way to understand the lung condition of these patients. And these examples could include sniffling sounds, cough sounds, vocal characteristics, amongst others. But most of these works rely on active assessments, like some of which we've seen in this session as well. And examples could include voicing a syllable or forcefully blowing into a spirometer. But these tasks could be strenuous, especially for older patients who primarily suffer from this disease. And also, sometimes active assessments could not be the best representation of the acoustic characteristics of an individual because a patient could control it. Passive assessments, on the other hand, are much more convenient, but most prior work has looked at individual symptoms like wheezing or coughing, which may or may not be present in all COPD patients, or they have evaluated their system in controlled laboratory settings, which can't really be generalized to a real-world scenario. So to address these limitations, PulmoListener uses passively collected speech to assess the lung condition of COPD patients in the wild. And making it work in the wild has to be the most challenging yet exciting aspect of this work. In our work specifically, we use a smartwatch to record the audio from patients, just to ensure user proximity at all times. But in an uncontrolled everyday setting, a smartwatch could record audio from a range of different sources, such as the patient's pets barking, or a TV playing in the background, or just voices of other people that the patients might be having a conversation with. So, how do we separate speech from all the noise that this smartwatch can record? For this, we process all the data through a voice activity detector that filters out everything except speech. But this speech could contain voices of different types of people except the patient as well. So how do we then identify the patient's own voice in this speech? For this, we pass the audio through a speaker verification model that filters out everything except the patient's own voice. Now we have useful speech from the patient that we can use, but how do we use it to assess their lung condition? So for this, we transform the audio that we have recorded in a day into a concise representation and pass it through our final neural network that classifies the audio into low versus high severity. A low severity means that their situation is under control, but a high severity indicates that it could be a potential cause for concern. But this obviously is a simplified version of our pipeline. In an actual implementation of PulmoListener, it would predict these labels on a daily basis, which means that an entire day of audio constitutes one single sample. So we need a better way to summarize it. To do that, we begin by breaking down the audio into 1 hour periods, and transform it into a sequence of features containing an MFCC spectrogram from each hour of the day. And this sequence is what gets passed through a neural network, which finally gives us the severity level of these patients. But coming back to how do we get to this sequence, this is obviously a complex process, so I urge you guys to read the paper, but I'll just quickly go over it. So we begin with 1 hour of data, say 9 to 10 a.m. All this audio is segmented into 2-second frames. We pass it through a voice activity detector, a speaker verification model, and we get probabilities indicating whether a frame contains speech and whether a frame contains the patient's voice. Now, if these probabilities cross a certain threshold, we calculate a final score, which is used to select the best frame to represent that hour in the sequence. So, but if we forget about all of this for a bit, we have to remember that the main takeaway from this entire pipeline is our MFCC sequence, because it not only helps towards data summarization, but also ensures, helps in maintaining user privacy, because although for now we processed all the data offline, we are working towards integrating all the speech processing components on device so that ultimately only 12 2-second non-consecutive audio frames leave the device for severity classification. And these frames are drawn from the sequence that we just talked about. But going back to the current implementation, to evaluate and test our pipeline, we collected data from 8 COPD patients. And while that may not sound like a lot of data, not a lot of patients, we followed them for around 164 days, which is approximately 5 to 6 months. And on each of these days, we collected continuous audio throughout the day, which gave us a lot of data to deal with. And apart from audio, we also collected daily symptom questionnaire responses, wherein the patients were asked to indicate the symptoms that were worse than their usual baseline on the day before. And this served as our ground truth, because we used these symptom reports to calculate the final severity level of these patients. So we've set up the data pipeline, we've talked about the data set. Let's answer the main question here. Can we actually detect COPD severity using speech? Spoiler alert, yes. But the main takeaway from this result over here is that we need personalization to do that. When we look at the far left of this graph, on the x-axis we have the number of days that we need to personalize the model versus the performance on the y-axis. And what we see here is that when we use 0 days of data to personalize the model, we can only get so far. And when we try to personalize it, we see that by the 9th day of patient data that we had added into the model, we could achieve a sensitivity and specificity of around 80%. And this was a great result, but we went on to test if we could predict the COPD severity before it actually happens. And again, we saw that up until 4 days in advance, there was marginal decrease in performance, meaning that up until 4 days in advance, we could predict the change in the COPD severity before it actually even happens. And this was a really interesting result. It highlights that changes in vocal characteristics start appearing much before the patients start experiencing symptoms. And this opens up so many possibilities for timely interventions and holds implications for both the patients and their healthcare providers. So to summarize, a few key takeaways from this work would be the fact that vocal characteristics are an invaluable biomarker of pulmonary health, and we show that how temporal acoustic variations can be used to infer COPD symptom severity. Also, the end-to-end speech processing pipeline that we propose in this work provides a blueprint for conducting speech analysis in the wild, and it could be used for a range of different applications. And lastly, PulmoListener allows patients to track the condition regularly, empowering them to make active choices about their lifestyle, and most importantly, it enables timely interventions leading to lower hospitalizations and better recovery. So that brings me to the end of this talk. I'd be happy to take any questions right now, or you can find me here.
Hello, thank you for this talk. I'm Abdulaziz from the University of Texas, Arlington. I'm just a little curious about why you chose the smartwatch as the way to detect the acoustic signals as opposed to a smartphone, or collect it from the earbuds and transfer it to a computational source. Okay, just another extension question. So do they have to like directly speak into the smartwatch, or it can be just? Thank you.